You've been hearing about the deadly effects of fentanyl and how some people are getting their hands on it without even realizing it.
But why now? And what is fentanyl exactly? What makes this drug different?
A luxury mansion at the end of a quiet street in Minneapolis, owned by two Somali-born lawyers admired by the entire community, helping thousands of immigrant families avoid deportation and saving hundreds of seemingly hopeless cases. But what happens if behind that perfect facade, the FBI raids at midnight and discovers an underground tunnel over 1,700 feet long, tons of drugs, weapons, and 10 children being prepared for transport? Could that reputation be the perfect shield for a massive criminal network? Sit tight and listen on, because the true story lies beneath the ground. Hit like if you're curious. December 22nd, 2025, around 4:13 a.m. in Minneapolis, Minnesota. On paper, this address was almost untouchable. The mansion at the end of the street belonged to two Somali-American lawyers, Ayaan Osman, 44, and Mahad Noor, 47. Their legal records were clean and clear. They rarely appeared in public. Their reputation was meticulously maintained, not for vanity, but seemingly to serve as a shield. In community rooms and legal clinics, their names were mentioned like a promise. Ayaan was the face, the calm voice that could soothe a room, the person who walked into a tense meeting and made everyone feel safe again. Mahad was the method, the strategist famous for precision in court and paperwork that always fell into place. They built a pedestal that the whole city wanted to stand on. Over 1,800 civil petitions handled, 312 housing disputes resolved, more than 90 high-profile appeals, many successful. For immigrant families, they were the ones who knew the right forms, the right deadlines, the right clauses, and the right words. When deportation notices arrived, they stepped in. When fears about residency status grew, they explained the process. When a case seemed hopeless, they made it possible. That reputation was perhaps why this street remained quiet for so long. But behind the polished exterior, some investigators suspected the couple had formed an alliance with CJNG leadership, using their legal influence as cover to transport goods into the U.S. through illegal routes from Mexico. Together, that network was alleged to have funneled over 4.4 tons of cocaine and fentanyl into American communities. Not through reckless street crime, but through a structure designed to evade attention. The two lawyers didn't need to transport it themselves. They just needed to keep the doors open, just keep certain files quiet, just make certain people and shipments disappear from the system. The consequences came swiftly. Over $280 million vanished from community support programs. Outreach projects operated for 5 to 8 years without results. Families waiting for aid never received it. Cases were marked complete but never officially closed. Now combine that scale with one final hidden layer. Beneath the house, according to investigators, existed a corridor with no cameras, no logs, and no local surveillance. Private security teams worked rotating shifts. Military-grade surveillance jamming equipment surrounded the property and tunnel, defeating local monitoring from the start. The public saw a mansion. The investigation team saw a protected fortress. At 4:13 a.m., the order was launched. The street was still asleep. Porch lights were on. Windows were dark. The convoy rolled in without headlights. Space was tight, timing precise like a practiced route. By 4:47 a.m., federal units converged from 3 directions. Over 250 personnel from the FBI and ICE were deployed, a scale rarely permitted in a residential area. The initial entry did not meet the usual family response. Reinforced doors slowed the process. Security shutters locked internal hallways. Individuals posing as private security moved into defensive positions. What unfolded was not chaos, it was prepared resistance. The confrontation lasted less than 12 minutes, a short time on the clock, but heavy enough to redefine everything investigators once believed about the couple who once stood in court as defenders of justice. When the final corridor was secured, no agents lost their lives. A few guards were subdued, and what lay behind the last barrier was no longer speculation. It was evidence. Behind a hidden passage downstairs, agents found the entrance to a tunnel system reinforced, engineered, and clearly intentional. Inside the underground chambers were computer terminals, inventory scanners, sealed containers, and stacks of documentation spanning years. Along the far wall were containers of approximately 2.2 tons of heroin and fentanyl wrapped and labeled for transport worth over $550 million on the black market. But the most heartbreaking discovery wasn't measured in weight. 10 terrified, confused children were being prepared for transport in the same processing area where sealed crates were staged. Nearby agents recovered 72 handguns hidden in compartments and storage areas, along with long guns and ammunition ready to be grabbed in seconds. Encrypted hard drives storing legal correspondence and shipping forms linked the staging room to multi-state routes. As morning spread, the total seizure went far beyond the corridor. Across connected locations and vehicles, the figure was tallied at approximately 2.64 tons of narcotics, including heroin and fentanyl packaged with standardized labels and repeatable processes. By dawn, Minneapolis no longer saw the house as a home, but as a gateway. I subscribe because the next part isn't underground, it's in the paperwork, and that is where the real tunnel begins. Minneapolis didn't look like a battlefield. That was exactly the point. The raid proved one thing early on: the mansion wasn't the destination. It was a route converter. Once the tunnel existed, the case was no longer about a house, but about schedules, endpoints, and the cover system that kept the route alive. For months, analysts tracked repeating patterns. Rotating late-night security, unregistered vehicles, and underground movements that no homeowner could reasonably explain. A tight rhythm between 100 and 300 a.m. Cooling fans and silent generators ran when household energy levels were at their lowest. Ventilation cycles, loading ramps. The house above was quiet, but the system below was awake. This mattered because tunnels weren't built for drama. They were built for repetition. Engineers and forensic teams entered the passage and confirmed it wasn't a makeshift escape. It was a purposeful underground system built over time, reinforced in stages, and maintained with quiet precision. The main reinforced section ran about 640 feet beneath neighboring property lines, supported by steel frames and sectional poured concrete. Power lines ran through hidden conduits, and the larger network, according to investigators, totaled approximately 1,700 feet. When factoring in side branches and access points in the staging chamber, details that changed the entire scale appeared on the interior walls. "26 processing stations, each assigned a series of numeric forms. Scanning equipment recorded inventory codes, weight logs, and transfer timestamps. Every movement was recorded with corporate-like discipline. Analysts later confirmed over 312 recorded transfers through the tunnel during its operation, with an estimated market value exceeding $480 million. The rhythm was terrifyingly steady. 5 unmarked vehicles arrived in sequence. Crates were scanned, logged, and sealed. The tunnel door closed before dawn. Above ground, the neighborhood remained unchanged. Then another terminal system appeared, tracking human movement, not goods. Using entry codes instead of names, the records reflected cycles toward coastal transit points spaced 11 to 19 days apart. That thread forced the case to expand because Minneapolis didn't need to be a coast to feed a coast. It just needed to be a silent node while goods and people moved out along transport corridors, and paperwork was what kept it silent. Over 1,000 criminal drug case files were reported missing, misrouted, or marked finished without being cleanly closed. In reality, this meant surveillance was delayed, trials slipped into voids, and people who should have been present became invisible behind procedural terminology. Over a 12-month period, more than $78 million in settlement transfers were routed through legal trust accounts linked to entities that no longer existed on paper. This is how a city loses control without a shot fired. It happens in the file room. By late morning, the command desk was no longer asking what was found under the mansion. They were asking what else the mansion touched. Do you think a network like this survives on fear or on paperwork, Minneapolis, Minnesota? Orders came in sequences, not words. Units were staged. Positions assigned. Because once the tunnel is real, you don't treat the mansion as the whole case. You treat it as a gateway. Control first. Road units locked the grid with quiet positions, forcing all vehicles into predictable lanes. No fanfare, no panic, just control. Inside, Osman and Mahad were separated immediately, not for drama, but for preservation. Phones went into signal-blocking bags. Laptops were properly shut down and seized. Paper records were boxed and labeled in strict evidentiary order. Drawers were photographed before being opened. Case files were handled as potential keys to the missing records issue, because this assault wasn't just about what the team found, but what they kept from disappearing. "7:08 a.m., North Minneapolis. A shopping center suite was entered. Signs claimed immigration consulting and document services. The waiting room looked reliable by design. Behind the back office door was a forgery line operating with printers, laminators, blank forms, IDs, shipping labels, burner phone packaging, and workstations, crafting documents to move people and goods through checkpoints while the law firm upstairs remained clean. Agents recovered encryption devices and forms linked to multi-state transit routes. "7:22 a.m. Northeast Industrial Corridor. A cold storage facility sat behind chain-link fences and ordinary signs. Trucks came and went. Workers looked like a normal shift. Inside pallets were wrapped in ordinary film. The team was trained to cut seal samples. The packaging pattern matched the mansion. Label spacing matched the staging chamber. Processes matched the tunnel. Seizure numbers climbed higher. The 2.2 tons in the corridor was just the core batch, not the ceiling. The 2.64 tons for the entire operation reflected what was being prepared for forward transit. "7:49 a.m. downtown Minneapolis. A second law office was entered quietly with a warrant. Behind conference tables, degrees, and tidy files, agents reached the storage of ledgers. Payment logs, transfer schedules, paper charities, and shell providers paying for non-existent services. The paperwork was so clean it looked legal page by page. As analysts stacked the pages, the pattern emerged. This wasn't just a legal practice, it was a routing desk. Names repeated across unrelated files. Contacts repeated where they shouldn't. Mailing addresses appeared across rent disputes, immigration filings, and criminal cases that should have been sealed. Missing files no longer felt missing. They felt relocated. "8:11 a.m. From the outside, it looked like a typical rental space. But inside was a prep unit with crates, packaging, hidden weight compartments, and tools laid out for daily work, with labels matching the cold storage pallets, barcode prefixes matching seized equipment, and notes reflecting the exact same night rhythm, not careless, but consistent. By mid-morning, transport teams moved detainees, couriers, drivers, guards, document runners, and support roles, keeping the system alive without looking like bosses. By day's end, the operation led to 96 arrests across multiple locations, including primary targets and key support roles. By late afternoon, interview teams began building a human map. Not just who appeared, but who was allowed to appear, who had keys, who had access codes, and who signed for deliveries without asking. Those roles were more important than muscle because CJNG doesn't expand by screaming. It expands by assigning tasks, auditing compliance, and replacing anyone who breaks the rhythm. That's why the support layer in this case read like a payroll, not a gang list. And his arrests mounted one phrase from the case file kept returning because it explained the whole structure. This was not misconduct. It was a parallel legal system built by two people who believed the law existed to serve them. "12:38 p.m. Minneapolis, Minnesota. Evidence split into lanes. Physical lane weapons, narcotics equipment, packaging, tunnel engineering. Administrative lane record signatures, access logs, outcomes that shouldn't have ended that way. The second lane was where the temperature dropped because the tunnel under the mansion was no longer the most important thing. The real tunnel was the paper trail that made the underground route useful. Analysts opened files like safes, not confessions, but repeating procedures. Client intake forms appeared too often. Notary stamps appeared where they shouldn't. Mailing addresses repeated across unrelated cases. Results always fell into the same narrow set of procedures. Then the financial backbone became clear. Legal funds for community representation were quietly diverted. Documents certified through fake approvals. Grant programs operated for years without closing reports. When analysts built the transfer charts, it wasn't one big wire. It was a drip system. Small, harmless-looking transfers repeated frequently. Payments split into predictable amounts. Funds routed through surface legitimate charities. Vendor invoices listed services that never happened. Over a 12-month period, more than $78 million in settlement transfers were routed through legal trust accounts linked to entities that no longer existed on paper. Money didn't sit in Minneapolis, it moved, and so did the goods. Shipments through port channels used fake customs declarations, protected under judicial privilege, a legal cover that kept inspections and challenges far enough away to maintain the rhythm. In the press conference, agents described a tunnel connecting the border not by a continuous trench, but by a handoff structure starting under this house and ending at border inspection desks. That line didn't mean a straight tunnel to the ocean. It meant paperwork and routing structures could hand off from hidden corridors to transport corridors, then to coastal points on predictable cycles. The corridor was the start. The system was the weapon. By afternoon, operational questions became cold calculations. If a respected address could hide 26 processing stations, 312 recorded transfers and coded human movement cycles every 11 to 19 days, then the surface story was never protected. It was camouflaged. 6:33 p.m. Minneapolis, Minnesota. After a day like that, the command desk didn't celebrate. 96 arrests, 2.64 tons, seized 72 hidden guns, a 1,700-foot tunnel network with a 640-foot reinforced section, and 10 children rescued were national news numbers. But news cycles don't stop pipelines. They just force them to reroute, so the final step wasn't a press conference, but closing the corridors. A team hit a commercial unit leased outside city limits. Inside were pallets arranged by route packing stations, label printers, and whiteboards with time blocks reflecting the exact same night rhythm. 7:46 p.m. traffic units intercepted transport vehicles linked to the same barcode prefixes. No chase. Controlled stops. patient searches, goods packaged like the previous crates, consistent weight distribution, consistent label spacing, consistent discipline. "8:24 p.m. Digital analysts push the final correlations. Phone numbers seized from the shopping center office matched contact data linked to document handoffs across multiple unrelated legal files. The same numbers appeared across categories that should never have touched. This wasn't just a movement network, it was an enablement network. Because anyone can move a crate, not everyone can move a file. That's where the two lawyers were vital. They didn't need to carry contraband. They carried credibility. The kind that makes paperwork slide, outcomes bend, and questions vanish. Minneapolis will take months to untangle what one raid exposed in hours. With audits, file reviews, and reopened cases, families learned that complete didn't mean closed, and victim services attended to children who should never have been prepared for transport. And the hardest part wasn't the concrete, it was the trust. Trust doesn't break like glass, it breaks like ice. Quietly then, all at once. A tunnel under a mansion is terrifying. A tunnel in the system is worse. The biggest lesson for us is never let reputation or appearance blind you. An untouchable address, a lawyer trusted by the community, a peaceful mansion can hide the most horrific things. Always ask questions, verify information, and don't hesitate to doubt things that are too perfect. Because trust is precious, but blind trust is exactly the gap where underground tunnels are built. Friends, be a little more vigilant about your surroundings. Sometimes the truth lies deeper than what we see. And so after that shocking raid, Minneapolis faces a harsh truth. Trust can shatter as quietly as thin ice. An underground tunnel is scary, but a tunnel in the legal system and paperwork and reputation is many times scarier. If an untouchable mansion could hide tons of drugs, weapons, and innocent children for years, does your city have similar untouchable addresses? What do you think? Is this just an isolated incident or a sign of larger networks hiding in plain sight? Leave a comment below. I really want to read your thoughts. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the stories that truly lie beneath the surface. Thanks for watching. See you in the next part.